Just note, since we have a full panel, that only 2 microphones can be open at the same time, so you'll need to switch on and off. Thank you very much.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Now that we're all energized and, we're all. Okay, now that I've figured out how to work the microphone. Good morning, everybody. Glad we're all energized and ready to go for this morning's panel. Really glad to be here. I'm Christy Olenek. I am the Vice President of Technical Services at Making Sense International, and I'm also the co-champion for the Youth Engagement Community of Practice. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Swigert, as Christy said. I'm also the co-champion of the Youth Engagement Community of Practice, along with Christy, as well as an independent consultant.
So we're super excited that the theme this morning is youth engagement, and the last panel, guys, set the bar high, so I hope you're ready. We are, as Cassandra said, we're going to be talking about positive youth development, integrating positive youth development into programs. So I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. They're going to give you about 5 minutes of background on each of their projects. And then we're going to move to some questions. I'm going to ask some questions around how they've integrated a positive youth development approach, and Mike's going to drill them on how they've worked on integrating youth in their projects. So, Lisa, I think you are up first. And I believe this is the clicker. We have to play it to the back.
It works, yeah. So just get right to get it. Or I can take it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Kaplan, and I'm the Chief of Party of Puentes para el Empleo, Bridges to Employment in El Salvador. The objective of the project is to create and develop and improve opportunities for at-risk youth. We work with youth from 16 to 29 years of age, helping them in opportunities to return to school if they would like to or need to do that, to have training in technical fields and in life skills, to have job opportunities, and also opportunities for self-employment to open businesses if that's what they choose to do. I'd like to be able to see it. That one's a little too far away. All right. This is our virtuous circle, as we call it. What we do in the project is start in the upper left-hand quadrant, where we research and we work with the business sector, with companies, to find out what their needs are, their needs for employment and their needs in order to grow and develop as companies. Starting with what the needs are, we hope that we can fill their needs. We then move to creating alliances between the private sector and training centers, so that the training centers actually create curriculum that will meet those needs. Developing these relationships also help the training centers provide training for jobs, and not to train youth that will not be able to find employment after they leave. One anecdote is that we have frequently talked with many companies and many training centers and asked them who their clients are, and they always say that their clients are the students, and they never say that their clients are the employers. And we're trying to have them believe and to change and to recognize that their real clients, their true clients, are the employers. And so when they can look at that, they can fill the needs of the employers, and youth can get jobs. What we don't want is for youth to be trained in useless skills where they wouldn't be able to find jobs afterwards. After we develop these relationships between the training centers and the business sector, Then we move to training. Training not only in technical skills, but also in life skills, work skills, soft skills. And then hopefully the youth will find jobs, and also there are other opportunities for youth who would like to become entrepreneurs. This is a very busy slide, but these are our main objectives in the project. We have 3 overall objectives. The first one is to create a more favorable environment for youth. We work with the national government and also with local governments to change, improve, and disseminate information on policies, practices, laws to help youth and help employers create better environments for youth. We also work with companies to help change their mindsets about the youth so that they're not afraid of the youth in the communities in which we work. A lot of times youth are not even given an opportunity based on their address. Our second objective is to build the capacity of the training centers. As I said, we work with training centers, but not only on working on their curriculum, but also on helping them improve their teacher training, methodologies, the administration, the finances, keeping books better, keeping records better, and also working on some building improvements so that they're more updated and better environment for youth. The last one is providing opportunities for youth, and while we look at this as this is where we talk to the youth, really we engage youth in all 3 of our objectives, but the Objective 3 team is focused on recruiting the youth from the at-risk communities in which we work and also working more in life skills in that area. And that's our general overview. This is one of our recruiting activities.
I'm Kristen Brady, and I'm Project Director for YouthPower Action, and I'm going to talk today about one of our activities in Mozambique. This is a field support activity, and we work, this is a very small project. We're working with 400 youth and 500 family parents and caregivers. This activity is funded under PEPFAR. Our primary objectives are health outcomes, but we understand that to accomplish those health outcomes, we need to have a holistic approach. So this project is focused on improving education and employability, health behaviors, and civic engagement. We've been doing this activity for a number of years, and one of the things we've done under this YouthPower Action activity this year has been to add a number of components, and particularly components that help us think about scale and thinking about integrating some of those other PYD elements and addressing issues that we can see as deepening that PYD approach. So as Mike talked about the 4-legged stool, this project really does do all 4 of the positive youth development domains. So I'm just going to walk through each of those domains as a way to think about what we're trying to accomplish in this project. The primary element, the primary pillar of the program is building assets and agencies. We have a 4.5-month program which young people come to the Learning Center every day for 4 hours, 5 days a week. It's a very intensive program, and we're working with OVCs who are highly vulnerable. We focus on a broad range of skills, as you'll see up there, reinforcing literacy and numeracy. And this year we added a remedial literacy program because so many of the youth that we wanted to bring into the program just didn't have strong enough literacy skills to be able to be part of the program. We focus a lot of the very traditional work readiness skills, soft skills, job search skills, career preparation, thinking about your future, IT skills. And then we deal with a lot around health issues, healthy behaviors, the obvious ones of SRH and HIV in this environment. Many of these kids have lost one or both parents to HIV, but also TB, sanitation, hygiene, malaria, a broad range of skills that they often end up bringing home to their families and improve some of the healthy behaviors in families. We also help them deal with stigma and discrimination. Being HIV orphans, they have a lot of stigma, and they often come into the program very timid and lacking self-confidence. And so we're trying to help them deal with that and have the assets to address some of that stigma and discrimination. And we also deal a lot with gender issues. one of the ways that we bring all these different aspects of the program together is through project-based learning. And project-based learning is particularly effective at building soft skills. And we see that helps particularly with critical thinking, with teamwork, with presentation skills, and with building self-esteem. They're learning to do something different, they're taking challenges, and they're able to do that through this project-based learning approach. After they finish the 4.5-month program, they go into an internship where they spend 3 months, and then following that, they have the opportunity to join a youth club, which we'll talk about in a minute. One of the things we did this year was implement this program with the government vocational training program. They had seen these kids coming to this program saying, hey, these kids have the skills we want our kids to have. Our kids have the technical skills, but they don't have the work ethic. They don't have the way to be in a workplace. So they wanted to implement this themselves. So that's been a great addition this year. In terms of youth contribution, we do it in a very day-to-day basis. We involve youth in decision-making in very simple ways. In every project, they have to think about how they're going to carry out their project, so they're doing voice and choice in their daily learning activities. We also, every time we're making a decision that would affect the youth, we ask them, we put it to them. What should be the menu for our meals? Every time we make a decision, we first ask them. We also have, in terms of youth contribution, on Saturdays, after the first 6 weeks or so of the program, the youth start carrying out projects with their peers. They identify 2 to 3 peers, they bring them together on Saturdays, and they replicate what they did in their program with their peers. And then after the program, they can join youth clubs. And the youth clubs, the youth decided which clubs they wanted to have, so they have an IT club, an employability club, and a community service program. So some of the things the clubs have done is train other youth in their community on IT skills. They do workshops at schools to help other secondary school students understand issues around healthy behaviors. And then they did a youth-led labor market mapping so that they were going out to interview employers and find out what their market needs were, what their job needs were. So that's all the field of youth contribution. In terms of the enabling environment, and I can't emphasize this being how strong a pillar part of this fourth-legged stool is, we look at all aspects of human relationships. So the first and foremost is having facilitators who understand young people, who know how to relate to them, who respect them. So we prioritize how the facilitators interact with young people in our selection and training and our code of conduct for how they work with young people during the program. We have e-mentors, and these are people in the professionals in the communities who they relate to via email. And this gives them a trusted adult as well as some professional networks and the ability to talk to somebody, ask an adult about questions about their own career. Then we added, one of the things we added this year was an expanded program with parents. We'd always had parent outreach programs, but this year we did a parent support group because we felt that parents really needed to understand adolescents better. And our youth asked us for this. They said, can you work with the parents? And we started talking to the young people and said, okay, we'll come talk to the parents in the parent support groups, but they wanted to go further. They wanted to take it to their communities. We found the parents really didn't understand adolescents. They didn't understand what was going on with them. They didn't understand how to support them. We recently did some focus groups, and the parents said, I now have a much different image of my young person. I have a much more positive image, and I know the importance, and I know how to communicate with my child. And so we see these tremendous improvements in terms of how adults relate to their children. In terms of a safe space, as I mentioned, these are young kids who have had a lot of trauma, and so that safe space is incredibly important to them. We create a code of conduct with the young people so they know how they're supposed to behave with each other. We do training very early on in the program for how do you provide positive feedback? How do you talk to other people? And so they know how to interrelate. They know how to work in groups and how to relate to each other. And that has a very lasting impact. When we've done studies years down the road, their friends are still friends from the program. They've changed a lot of their friends, and they now have these strong friendships in PPF that they've been able to continue as they move forward. Some of the youth tell us being in PPF is like being in a family. And I can talking about sex in this program is like talking to my friends. And I can't talk to my parents. Our culture, we don't talk to parents about this, but in PPS, I feel like I have a family. So that importance of feeling safe in this space is really important for all the gains that we've seen, particularly for this population. The other thing is that this is an OVC project, and so we identify the needs through a caseworker who goes to the family. We integrate, we know what's happening with the family, so we can integrate between family and the program and refer them to services, particularly for other health services. We can also have a social worker on staff, so when we see a young person who's really struggling, that's having behavioral issues, we can help identify additional support for them. So that's, I'll stop there, and that's the broad outlines of the program.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Georgina Mendoza McDowell, and I'm the project director of Proponte Más, which is a secondary violence prevention activity program in Honduras. I am with Creative Associates International, and I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to share some of the work that we do in Honduras, and you'll hear a little bit more from Louie here. We actually work together in Honduras. So let me see if I can get this. Okay, that's us. I'll just move there. So in Proponte Más, we work in five of the communities with the highest rate of crime. You can see from the map there, we're in Tegucigalpa, we're in San Pedro Sula, La Ceiba, and Cholame and Tela. And, oh good, yeah. It's like, is that the right slide? Right. So the work that we do is primarily working with families. We work with 9 risk factors as diagnosed with the YSET, which is the Youth Services Eligibility Tool. And what we're trying to do is that we work with youth in the ages of 8 to 17. Once we apply the YSET to these young people, it helps us determine based on the number of risk factors, whether they are at a primary, secondary, or tertiary level of violence prevention. What we do is we really, and this sometimes, it seems that you guys planned really well in sitting us together because young people want us and need us to work with parents. It's important for us to remember that young people, children or young adults, are not an island in and of themselves. They're part of a larger whole, part of a family, part of a neighborhood, part of a community, part of a city. We measure risk factors, but we also want to increase protective factors. And the biggest protective factor that we have is the family. We know that if we focus on the young person and help him or her get better opportunities or soft skills, isn't enough. It's good, it's critical, it's important, and it needs to happen. But it's not enough if they can't go back home in an environment that is supporting, loving, and safe. We have 5 results, which are, and you can read the following there, but it's 1, making sure that these at-risk youth receive secondary prevention services in their communities, that we support the services provided for eligible youth and their families in these targeted communities, that we establish a cadre of family counselors, that we strengthen alternative justice measures, and that lastly, we establish community-based secondary prevention model. We have an excellent network of promotores in each of the 5 communities. These promoters or promotores are from the community from which they serve. Why? Because it's important to have that credibility, to have the confianza, the trust, yeah. I just came back from Honduras this weekend. I'm still in Spanish mode. To have that trust with the community and with the families to say, yes, I know what you're going through, and I also know the resources that we have in our community. Let us work together and see how we can best help your family and your young person. And of course, this is all strictly voluntary. One of the main things that we hear from our promotores for primary is exactly what Kristen mentioned, which is, I don't really understand young people. I don't understand that my child is no longer a child, but a teenager or a preteen that is having thoughts of his own, natural state of wanting to rebel in a very healthy manner, and sometimes that's not understood. And it can seem simple and even basic, but it's absolutely critical that we bridge that communication between child and parent. The second cadre, wonderful people that we work with, are the family counselors. We actually have, I think now, 58 family counselors in 3 of the main areas where our offices are held, and that is in Tegucigalpa, San Pedro Sula, and La Ceiba. They're actually also having an opportunity to get their master's in family counseling now in collaboration with the University of Honduras, and another master's with in collaboration with the University of Malaga from Spain in issues of juvenile justice, which I'll get to in a bit. The family counselors are trained, well-trained, before they go to the community and work with individuals. So the family counselors focus on the secondary violence prevention, and this is a more focused approach to looking at risk factors that exist for this young person. Some of the most common risk factors that we see are, of course, peer influence, are parent influence. Sometimes we have parents that are in a gang or sympathizers. We have those that, and we've heard it here, and I'm sure this is something that's worldwide, lack of opportunities, lack of options for these young people. Now, it's important to mention that primary populations are those that live in neighborhoods where there is a high risk of joining gangs or of criminality in general. It does not mean that they are involved in any illicit affair, not the child and not the family. Important distinction. Secondary, also, we use the term of kind of at the door, if you want, at the doorway of perhaps wanting to join gangs or illicit groups, not having taken the step yet, and that's where we come in. And we want to make sure that they stay on this side of the doorway before they can cross. But in order to do that, we have to have a really focused approach. And working with the family takes a lot of trust, takes a lot of dedication and commitment, because it's not easy. So there are times where we have to work with them, and not times, always, we have to work with them with a lot of respect and knowing that this is for them and because they've asked. So this is all voluntary. And I wish there was one of the family counselors here to just let you know the amount of trust and relationship that goes into these conversations, because they're tough conversations. Nobody wants a stranger to come to your house and tell you how to raise your kids or how to raise your family or tell you what you're doing wrong. That's not what we do. We point out all the things that they're doing right. One of the things that we focus on, one of the strategies that we use in this prevention and intervention family model system, which is what we apply the YSET in context of, is a genogram. So looking at your family roots, knowing where you stand. You're not alone, and that goes beyond even your family and your community. We look at the ancestors. We look at what your grandparents, great-grandparents, et cetera, have done, and know that you're a part of that. You don't need to look for that elsewhere. Be proud of who you are and how unique you are and the role and part that you take in your family and your family's history. This has had quite an impact on a number of families throughout the country where this is applied, because they get to do it the way they want it to, right? We're just there to say, here's a genogram, and this is kind of what the purpose or the process is. And it's up to them to kind of draw it, to see what they want to include. They include, of course, stories, how did grandma and grandpa meet, et cetera. They also include a lot of music and art and one of our favorite things, recipes and cookbooks. And those go down in history, and all of a sudden they see themselves as part of something bigger and something grand and special. So it's really a strategy that comes from them, right? We don't need the extra resources for that. It's something that each and every person out there and in this room has and can draw from. So we look at that as one of our strongest methods to really connect and make sure that, hey, you don't need to cross the door. Close that door, come back. You're welcome and you're loved and you're part of something bigger. And that's really kind of the chunk of Proponte Más. we also do juvenile justice work, and extremely proud of that because we have established, again, I'm trying to translate into English, technical committees on juvenile justice. And we really work with the government and a number of actors to make sure that those who have been involved in some sort of illicit affair, not everything is a homicide, not everything is, violent, but in some sort of act that maybe they shouldn't have done, that not everything has to go to detention, not everything has to throw you behind bars, but in fact, let's look at these alternative measures. And together with a number of other actors and partners, we've been able to establish this committee and really come up with some opportunities for reform and to study the effects that alternative measures can have. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. What a privilege to be here and for all of us collectively to be working for 1.8 billion youth, as our speaker this morning was saying. My name's Louis Alexander. I work for Banyan Global. I'm a principal there. I oversee the Honduras project. It's a workforce development program. Our chief of party and country is Paul Teeple. And we collaborate very closely with Georgina's program, Proponte Más, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. The program focuses on at-risk youth in the same communities that Georgina was talking about, so we're in the exact same locations. The main difference is that their approach is a family approach and ours is a community-based approach. And one thing I'll be talking about more, if there are questions and space for that, is the importance of collaborating with other programs on the ground. And if one program is focused on communities, how it's important to work with organizations that are working with families. I'm going to be talking about Honduras, but I just got back on Sunday from Uganda where I was training on PYD, and I can't believe the extent to which families kept coming up time and time again in all of our sessions. So I'm glad to hear that this is coming up today. The program is funded by CARSI, and so it has a very specific objective of reducing violence, dealing with drug trafficking, and preventing migration. But we tend not to think so much about that on a day-to-day basis, and we're thinking much more about the youth and their opportunities for employment and the training process that they go through. We have 3 result areas that you can see. It's a 5-year program where you've just completed year 1. Those are the number of youth that we need to train and get employed. The second result has to do with strengthening the government agency for technical vocational training. This is a huge challenge. It's a $35 million per year operation with almost 1,000 employees and a very strong union. And we're trying to help this organization become more market-driven, more responsive to the labor market demand, and adjusting their curriculum, recruiting trainers and facilitators that are responsive to that, but also have a youth lens. And that is a huge challenge in this particular context. And the third result, which is the smallest but probably the most complicated, and you heard Georgina talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary preventive services. The YSET tool that USAID and Creative developed has been adapted. I believe YSET measures risk factors up to the age of 18, and so we're working with another organization that is doing part of the impact evaluation for the program, and so that tool has been adjusted so we could use it beyond 18. The program focuses on 16 to 30. And there's an interesting discussion going on about protective factors and risk factors. We thought at one point in our discussion with USA that we would be focusing much more on protective factors. Now it's gone back to risk factors with this new tool. There's a very interesting history around this tool and examples from the United States in the evolution of these tools and how they've been applied now in Central America. This is this diagram shows the various stages of our training. which certainly in terms of assets and developing agency among youth, focus on life skills and cognitive-based therapy, basic work readiness training, and then obviously the vocational technical training. And one thing I wanted to mention throughout, one of the things that you'll be hearing about in the innovation sessions later, and I have a colleague of mine who's visiting from Honduras to talk about our gender approach, is the extent to which we've integrated gender and social inclusion throughout this process, including engaging with the LGBT community in Honduras, which is very complex. And so those of you interested in hearing more about that, you can join our group later with Liana, who's there. Thanks for being here, Liana. This is just the strategy that we use to engage with the local vocational training organization. It is a huge challenge. Those of you who are familiar with government-run vocational technical organizations, and if you're familiar with those in the Latin America region, SENA in Colombia is one of the gold standards in that space. And we're taking senior leadership from INFOP plus leaders from collaborating organizations to Colombia next month. They've been going through a coaching process, and there's a very interesting approach of trying to develop the leadership and influence policy making at the highest level. This organization is so huge, so important to the country that even decisions are made at the level of the president of the country. Time. We can talk more afterwards. God, that time flies.
Thanks, Louie. Sorry to cut you off there, but we want to make sure that we have enough time for questions from the audience, but also we have a couple of prepared questions for you. Kristen actually did a really good job, I think, of outlining the YouthPower definition of positive youth development, the domain areas, assets, agency, contribution, enabling environment. So, Lisa, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how your project is focusing particularly on the enabling environment at the broad community level.
Sure. In Puentes, in our Objective 1, as I explained in my intro, we work to convince businesses, for example, to help them change their policies, change their practices to include more youth in their workforce. Oftentimes the businesses will complain and they say, well, we try to hire youth, but they just don't want to work here. They're just not successful. But when we sit down with them and we listen to them and we find out what they're actually doing to encourage youth, when we talk to the youth themselves, we find out that businesses are talking about trying to engage youth, and they're complaining that the youth are not applying for their jobs. But we find out they're actually creating expectations, or they're creating even qualifications that are impossible for young people to meet. So they'll ask for a young person between the ages of 25 and 35. That's what we are looking for. And they have to have 15 years of job experience in X area. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little. Maybe 8 years of job experience in an entry-level position. So right away, a young person fresh out of a training course doesn't qualify for the job. And so one of the things that we're doing with businesses is trying to get them to see that if they want a young person who's fresh out of school and has great innovative ideas, that they need to change their expectations, they need to change their qualifications and requirements for that job so that they can actually find young people to fill those positions. Another example of what we're working with the businesses is to help them understand that young people want to continue building. They want new opportunities. They want to continue studying. And a lot of the businesses will create an environment for young people that doesn't allow them to do that. One week their schedule is 8 to 5. The next week they have to work weekends. The week after that their schedule changes for evening hours. And young people don't want those opportunities because they want a schedule that they know about in advance. They want a schedule where they can continue studying if they'd like to in the evenings or weekends. So a lot of times the businesses will complain, but then when we look at the other side, they're not actually creating an environment that enables the youth to be successful. Another example of what we're doing on the project to create an enabling environment is to work with the government, both the national government and the municipal governments, on their laws and policies. One example of that is we're working with the government on a law for internships and practicums. One of the challenges that we found is that it's good for the young people to have an internship. It is good for them for a practicum because they can get experience, and also the employer can say, hey, yeah, that person can really do the job. But these unpaid internships often come with the promise of, you do a really good job for 2 months and we'll hire you if you work out. But what we found is that what really happens is the businesses look at this as 2 months of free labor, and then when that youth is complete, or when that youth has finished his or her internship, they go to the next cohort and get 2 more months of someone else's free labor. And so what we've been trying to do, and we're working with the government on this, is to create a law for internships and practicums so that the youth are not abused in this way. Those are just a couple of examples that we work on in the project for enabling the environment.
Thanks, Lisa. Kristen, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the enabling environment from the classroom perspective. I know when we were kind of prepping for this panel, you had mentioned that you have been creating safe space, enabling environment in the classroom. So,
great. As I mentioned earlier, the first aspect of that is making sure that we have the professionals that are working with the young people have the respect and the skills and the experience and passion for working with youth, that they are treating young people that way. So staff is first and foremost. And then helping the youth to create that safe space. So as I mentioned early in the activities, we do learning projects around how do you provide feedback to somebody else. And what does that look like? And so they learn how to communicate with their peers in a positive way. So they also are making the safe space safe for others and for creating those positive relationships amongst themselves. And a code of conduct that everybody agrees to. So they all agree to it. The young people agree to it. What happens if people don't show up on time? What happens if people don't behave in certain ways? And the same for the facilitators. So everybody knows what's expected of them. And the other thing is really having positive perceptions of young people and high expectations, realistic expectations, but seeing young people for their potential and for their strengths.
Super. Thank you very much. Georgina, you mentioned obviously the big focus on your family-based approach, and I'm curious what made you all decide to focus on the family and how that's worked out for the project.
Thank you. So the evidence and the data is what actually brought us to focus more on the family. The WISED and using this prevention and intervention family systems model approach is all evidence-based. And so that's kind of the clinical answer to that. But then kind of the practical, bringing it down to the everyday, it's just that it keeps coming up over and over. Our COP for Proponte Más, Robin Braverman, and our DCOP, Guillermo Céspedes, are both social workers by training. So they have a full understanding and appreciation of the value of working with the family. So it's working very well. I spoke a little bit about the genograms and, tying in family. They also have family celebrations. So through this family systems model approach, we at Proponte Más work with the families 4 times a month. So we have 4 meetings with them. And one of them, the last one of the month, is focused just with the young person. And we do group activities with other young people. And what we do is very similar to what Kristen identified, which is creating these safe environments that can create more pro-social activities and tendencies and ways of thinking. We all know also the power of peers, peer-to-peer pressure, for lack of a better word, and it could be positive pressure. It is one of the risk factors, but when placed in a safe and knowing, conducive manner, then that can also be one of the strongest protective factors. So it's really looking at the youth through his or her different aspects of their life and focusing on all the possible, not just the potential that they have, but the strength and the resilience that they already possess.
Super, thank you. And Louis, how about if you talk with us a little bit about partnerships? You had mentioned partnerships as key, so maybe you could share a little bit about that and how that's important to the enabling environment.
Sure. I think in terms of the enabling environment, there are a lot of things that have already been said that we're all doing. But one of the things I'd like to credit the team on the ground for is that, you know, initially we were looking for partnerships with the well-established local organizations that had a track record, and they were the first ones knocking on the door going like, we know where the youth are, we know how to reach them, your money will be safe with us, et cetera, et cetera. And the team felt that in order to reach the truly at-risk youth, we needed to go down to the local level. And these are very hot spots, you know, in Honduras. And the challenge, of course, was that while we were able to identify the truly at-risk youth, which I think that is the challenge for all of us, it's not reaching the low-hanging fruit. It is really seeking them out, and it's not easy. They're not going to be showing up ready to participate in any kind of training. The challenge, of course, has been that there's been a lot of hand-holding that was needed with those local organizations. At the same time, what it did is provided a lot of legitimacy and credibility to the process that we were involved in. And a lot of that at the very local level. So those partnerships are becoming stronger and stronger. And it's also encouraging youth to say, oh, this is for real. They're not just going with the city slickers, but they're here, you know, with the local organizations and the people that know us and with whom we have some trust already. And so we'd like to participate. So that's maybe one example of some of the partnerships.
Super, thank you. I'm going to pass it to Mike, who's going to drill you on some youth engagement questions.
Great. Thanks, Christy. And thanks to all of you for sharing a bit about your programs. So we've been hearing a lot today about youth engagement and development programs. So how do you provide young people with a meaningful role in really leading their own programs and driving their own solutions? We heard a lot about it in the panel this morning, and we also have heard a bit about it from our guests today on this panel. And what's interesting about this group is that you all are working with vulnerable young people. But an interesting question to ask as well is, how are you thinking about youth marginalization and the specific young people that you're working with? So I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about how you are engaging young people who may be more socially or politically or economically disadvantaged. What are some approaches that you use in your programs to engage, you know, these young people who are more diverse or young people who really need this assistance perhaps more than others? Maybe if each of you could just quickly talk about some approaches that you've seen effective in your own programs.
In Puentes, we work in 15 municipalities in the country. The 15 municipalities were selected for us. They are the ones that are the most vulnerable in the country in terms of violence. The country has a secure plan de salud seguro, the security plan, the national security plan, and it identifies 50 municipalities that are the most vulnerable in terms of violence, and the top 15 are the ones in which we work. Our population is considered at risk simply by the virtue of where they live. We also work with populations such as LGBTI. We work with youth with disabilities, Young mothers is another vulnerable group that we work with within those same 15 municipalities. And in order to recruit those youth, we work with the communities, we work with CSOs, we work with municipal governments. We also work with national and local NGOs, CSOs, that address the specific needs of those populations. For example, there are organizations that work particularly with LGBTI community, and specific organizations and foundations that work with youth with disabilities. To recruit the youth, we hold events independently with the project staff, but also together with INJUVE, which is the National Youth Organization. We also work with the Ministry of Labor and together on job fairs so that we can recruit youth to participate in the project. Those who are interested, those who need training, those who want jobs. We don't work with youth at the university level. So one of the things that we do to recruit the youth is to have them complete the RUP, the Unique Participant Registry, known as RUP in its acronyms in Spanish. This is a national registry. It's used by the government to track social services that are given to youth and to families, not only youth. And we were asked to use it to help us identify our youth. So when the youth talk about what homes they live in, what communities they live in, whether their house has a floor or a roof, what their income level is, how many people live in their home, what level of education they have, and other demographics. That information helps us determine whether the youth are vulnerable enough for the project. One of the questions has often come up is, oh, that youth doesn't look vulnerable enough. And so oftentimes it's kind of a challenge to say, well, yeah, he really is vulnerable, but we've been asked to prove it, and so we have the information in the RUP. We also conduct interviews, one-on-one interviews with every single youth that we have in the project, 20,000, and so it's a lot of individual interviews, but it does help us work with the person and to identify what do they really want to do. Or do they really need to go back to high school and get their high school degree first before they work on their technical training degrees? And another thing that we do with every single youth in the project is they go through a battery of psychometric tests for their initial intake into the project. And that helps us and it helps the youth determine what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, would they really be a good entrepreneur? Or is IT their best skill, and are they best served learning some programming skills and sitting at a computer and doing programming for companies? So those are the three intake activities that we do, and they're always done in the 15 municipalities in which we work. We've been recently asked to take a look at the new returnees that are mostly coming from the United States, and the government and the United States government as well, but the government of El Salvador has an intake center, and we recently started recruiting our youth there so that the youth who are coming back to El Salvador, particularly from the United States, do have some training opportunities, and we can help them get employment as well.
Yeah, I would say we follow a very similar process as Lisa described. We follow the criteria set out by the government of Mozambique in terms of what are the criteria for orphan and vulnerable children. We do interviews. We do a very basic literacy test and some very basic math skills test. As I mentioned, we did create the remedial literacy program because there were so many kids we wanted to bring into the program because they had such high needs that they weren't ready for it. We also require youth to be in school. If they're not in school, we help them get back into school, and oftentimes that means helping them get a poverty certificate, which means that they can get a waiver for school fees. So giving them that social support to be able to return to school. The only other thing I'd say we do that in addition is we go visit the households to make sure they are indeed vulnerable.
So very quickly, so we work in the 5 pre-designated areas, and 100% of the youth that we work with are at some level of risk, be it primary, secondary, or tertiary. Proponte Más itself focuses mostly on secondary youth violence prevention and the family systems model. They are all diagnosed or used using YSET, which is the Youth Services Eligibility Tool. Again, this is evidence-based and data-driven, and that's how we decide at what level they're going to fall in. And of course, when they fall on secondary level, then we apply the family counseling method.
I'm just going to mention 3 very specific things that we've been doing to ensure that the most disadvantaged are participating. One of them is what I've already mentioned, and working with organizations that already have legitimacy at the very local level and experience with working with the disadvantaged groups. Secondly is that to make sure that they understand, say, the LGBT community, that we're serious about this, we'd organize meetings with youth and with our staff who are 75% youth to kind of gauge their level of interest and to put ourselves out there and be open and transparent about what it is that we like them to participate in. And the third one that's been very powerful is mentors. We have a training program for youth mentors, and they are from the communities. So they go through the training, and they are already known to people in the community, and they've been an incredible resource at many levels, including recruitment. So that has been, you know, a really successful strategy for us.
Great. Thanks a lot, everyone. So we had a few more planned questions about youth engagement, but unfortunately we're running short on time, so we're going to have to cut those short. We would love to have, you know, I'm sure all of you have questions for these people, perhaps more about these programs, but given that we're out of time right now, we'd invite you to talk to all of them later during the roundtable sessions. Hopefully they'll all be available to answer your questions. So thanks a lot to everyone. We really appreciate it. And I think we're going to a break now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Before we break, very quickly, so I was really excited to hear just how much positive youth development was inculcated in your approach. I mean, there wasn't this sort of like side stream, that it really has become part and parcel of how these USAID projects are approaching youth development. So that was really exciting. And just some of the key themes in thinking about youth decision making, I heard about really activating that enabling environment, and there was a lot of discussion about parents and family and the critical nature of that. How young people are not an island, and recognizing that holistic cross-sectoral programs that work across the socio-ecological model was critical. Positive risk-taking and positive reinforcement were really important, as well as setting realistic expectations. So speaking of realistic expectations for ourselves, we are at break time. Use this time to both engage with each other. I would have loved to have ended with at least a so what, now what, or what, so what, now what. But take this time to be able to talk to each other. If you're feeling slightly introverted, you can complete your survey that's for USAID that's in your folder. It's the blue piece of paper in there, and they would go onto the, thank you, Maria. They would go in a bowl or a basket in the back. And otherwise, enjoy some coffee, some drinks, some water, some time with each other. We will resume at 11:15, so in 15 minutes, and have an opportunity to hear from, we heard the implementation side, now we're going to hear from the evaluation side. Thank you.